Thank you all for taking your seats. I am very happy to introduce our final panel of the day, which is the Future for Intelligence Analysis, Collection, and Activities. And joining us on the stage are John Gogasian, Director of NGA Source, Linnie Haynesworth, Vice President and General Manager, ISR Division of Northrop Grumman Information Systems, Dr. Bruce Hoffman, Director, Center for Security Studies at Georgetown University, John Mulligan, Deputy Director of the NCTC, and Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart, who's the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. And this panel is being moderated by a hometown hero. Yes, you are. WTOP's J.J. Green. Ladies and gentlemen, J.J. Green.
Well, pardon me if I don't live up to that, but thank you for having me here at the Claris Intelligence Conference. This indeed is a great opportunity for me. I'm very excited about it because I actually get to sit here with some of the big movers and shakers in the intelligence and security world and in front of the future intelligence and security world. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Just a quick point about how I was hoping to conduct this. I have a firm belief that it's not enough to know what's happening. You have to understand it. That's why we're here today with these folks, so that we can figure out what's happening, how it happens, how they do what they do, to the degree that they're able to tell us, and to perhaps get a little bit of a look at where the future will take us and how we might get there in a responsible way. So with that, with this particular panel, I want to start off by giving each one of the panelists an opportunity to tell us a little bit about their organization. And the first thing we'll do is we'll start with General Vince Stewart from the Defense Intelligence Agency. General Stewart, thank you for being here, but please take a few moments to tell us what it is that DIA does and anything else you want to tell us in a couple of minutes.
First of all, thanks for inviting me here. This is a great opportunity. This is the only way I could ever get into Georgetown. So this was particularly important for me, and I'm hoping that I can leave here with at least some certificate of attendance that I can hang on the wall as I barely graduated from my university, so this would be good. So let me take a minute and talk a little bit about DIA. You know, there are no stories about DIA out there, right? There are no movies made about us like there is about that beautiful building up at Fort Meade and NSA, and they got all kinds of great stories about CIA, but nobody ever talks about DIA. And that's kind of okay. In fact, I wish no one would talk about us at all right now, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But DIA has the responsibility to do the all-source analysis that helps our decision makers understand potential adversaries' military capabilities, how their capabilities are designed, how they intend to use them, and hopefully we understand it well enough that we understand their concept of operations, and we can give our decision makers enough time to decide how they will act to deter conflict. And if we can't deter conflict, how do we win decisively if we go to war? So we want to understand military capabilities. Now, you probably, again, never heard of much about DIA. We kind of think of ourselves something like Procter & Gamble. So hang with me on this one, okay? This is kind of a stretch. But think about this. All of us are familiar with the brands like Tide and Bounty and Pampers and Gucci, but we never think about Procter & Gamble when we think about those great brands. And DIA has a whole host of great brands, whether that's our headquarters here at Bolling Air Force Base, the intelligence analysts we provide to the combatant commands, the service intel centers, all of those entities, National Military Intelligence Center, all of those make up the great DIA brand. And we put all the pieces together to get comprehensive understanding of what our adversary is capable of doing. Now that's getting harder every day. There was a period of time when I think most of the intelligence community had a monopoly on this information, especially those things that you can steal, and could then get some real decisive time advantage over our adversary. That's changing. With the volume and the velocity of information that we have today, how does DIA and all of the intelligence community grab all that data, understand that data, render that in such a way that it will help our decision makers understand the context of crisis as they unfold? And so that's central to what we're thinking about doing as we go forward into the future. Great brands, great capabilities, the premier all-source intelligence agency in the world. And I stand on that statement. And I stand on that statement not because I want to compete with my partners in the intelligence community, because there's lots of mission. We don't have to compete for mission, but I want to compete for being the very best. That's what we say we want to do at DIA. We're going to stick with that, and we're going to see if anybody can knock us off the perch. Don't want to use what's that team up in New England, the football team that's generally pretty good. I don't really want to use those guys as a model, but maybe the '85 Chicago Bears. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, General Stewart. Next is John Mulligan, Deputy Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. John.
Thanks, JJ. NCTC is a relatively new construct. NCTC is all about counterterrorism. It was created directly as a result of the findings of the 9/11 Commission. It's been in existence for about 11 years, and it was a recognition by the nation, by the national security community, that frequently across the community we have pools of very valuable data, but we need to find mechanisms by which we can pull that data together as efficiently as possible and ensure that warfighters, people who are charged with self-defense, people who are charged with policymaking have that data as efficiently as possible so they can make informed decisions as to how to proceed. I've been in the intel community for over 30 years. I've been with this organization for less than a year. And I was really, really eager to join the organization because I truly believe in that construct. I think across the intel community, many of you have heard a lot of our speakers, we do fabulous work. And we do a great job at leveraging the technological advantage that we hold as a nation. But I think increasingly we came to recognize that what we also needed to do was leverage the organizational advantage that we had and to have agencies working very closely together. And so that's a particular focus of our organization. The second thing I wanted to say about our organization that really attracted me to it, we talked a little bit about transparency earlier. And you know, historically, again, as an intel professional, I spent so much of my career in working in highly secretive projects and not being able to talk about my work. Well, in the field of counterterrorism, what we've come to realize is the more that people know about the threat, the better off we all are collectively. So one of the things that we do at the center is we work not just across the intel community, but we work with our law enforcement partners, we work with the FBI and DHS to work vertically downward into the nation to ensure that state and local communities have awareness of terrorist threats. And to tell you, as an intel guy who spent so much of my career in this more secretive environment, that's one of the most uniquely satisfying parts of our mission space. And it's caused me to realize that what is really, really important about the information and data that we generate and that we spend lots of money as a nation to try and generate, we really need to find ways in which we can use that as efficiently across those various domains.
Thank you, John. Next is Dr. Bruce Hoffman, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. He is a professor and director of the Center for Security Studies here at Georgetown. Bruce?
Right. Well, firstly, welcome to Georgetown University, those of you who are visiting. I'm fortunate enough to direct the Center for Security Studies, which is co-hosting this conference with NGA, and also the Security Studies program, which is our Masters of Arts in Security Studies degree-granting institution. Our mission, quite simply, is to prepare the next generation of policymakers, analysts, and scholars to contribute actively and meaningfully to their country's national security and foreign policy. If you've been fortunate enough to get one of our new challenge coins, you'll see that our watchwords are theory and practice, so we're not an ivory tower institution, and also policy and scholarship. And if you see the logo, it's a skull, hearkening back to the days of the Special Operations Group in Vietnam. and to praise our special operations community, bedecked with a mortarboard, and that just about says it all about the program.
Thank you, Bruce. Next, we have Lenny Hainsworth, and Lenny is the Vice President and General Manager of the ISR Division at Northrop Grumman Information Systems. Lenny.
Thank you for being here, for having me here today. I love the opportunity to represent industry here today. Let's see, Northrop Grumman is a global security company. We work every day to focus on intelligence effectiveness, cyber resiliency, transparency, accuracy of data. We are a major supplier of services and major systems to our U.S. and international customers, both in the DoD world as well as across the IC community. And we focus on technology and innovation. And we do that in partnership with the great people that work at Northrop Grumman to meet the missions of our customers. So we're a dedicated team of people focused on our customers' missions.
Thank you, Lenny. John Gulgazian III is our next speaker. He is the Director, SOURCE, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. John.
Thanks, JJ. So yesterday morning I woke up and flipped on the news like many of you and saw the two major news stories going on. The Pope in DC, of course, and to me, the death of Yogi Berra. So it kind of, and they were going through a number of yogiisms, and one of them kind of gave me the clarity that about this conference and really about my job. The future ain't what it used to be. So, and I'm lucky enough to run source operations at NGA, and it is really about building a new future in what we're doing because of the excitement in the industry that I help the intelligence community and NGA figure out. Really the explosion of location-based information and acquiring that information for use in the intelligence community, and the ever-expanding commercial imagery industry as well. So as we are shaping the future for the intelligence community to take advantage of all the information that you all have spoken about all day long, we're really trying to drive to the future that we never envisioned in the past.
Thanks, John. This panel is called The Future for Intelligence Analysis, Collection, and Activities. And in the last few weeks, there has been an awful lot of talk out in the media, and we are responsible for a large part of it, about intelligence collection, analysis, and what's done with it and how it's done. All of you have said, and I did not forget, that you don't want to make any news up here today. So let me just put it to you this way. The news has already been made. So now what we'd like to do, if it's possible, is to put it in context, add a little perspective to it, because quite often, as hard as we in the media try, sometimes we don't get it quite right. And I'll admit that for myself, not for my colleagues, but when I do get it wrong, I do try to go back and fix it. But in this case, we want to get this right now. General Stewart, I know you are thinking exactly what I'm thinking. You want to be Procter.
Actually, I'm thinking.
You want to be Procter and Gamble, and that's good. So let me just begin with you, sir. There has been a lot of discussion about analysis and what's done with it after it's produced, and whether it's manipulated or whether it's tweaked or any of that. And this relates to that scenario that we've heard several times regarding the U.S. Central Command. This story, on a couple of occasions, DIA has come up in the story. Not that DIA has been the story, but supposedly the analysts who have been involved in this scenario, which the Inspector General at DOD is looking at, work for DIA. So I would like, if you would, to give us a little bit of understanding about how the analysis process works, how these people who are employed by DIA come to work for these other agencies, and what your process is for importing the intelligence products that they do and what's done with them afterwards.
So as you were teeing up that question, I was actually thinking, boy, I wish I was somewhere else.
I kind of figured you would think that.
So I've got to be careful because, as you said, there's an ongoing IG investigation, and I don't want to do anything. But I'll start here. We've got professionals in this business who take this business very, very seriously. They try to be unbiased, they try to be objective, they try to deliver unvarnished truth about what they see as they look at a whole host of information, some very credible, some suspect, and they debate what they think is going on as they put these pieces together. So you hope that it is clear, that you get 57 very good sources of information and it's picture perfect clear as to what's going on. But most of the time, it is completely unclear. And so you have this debate within analytic circles about what the information that you have really means. So it's some science, some intuition, there's a lot of judgment involved in this process. And what really disturbs me as I watch this play out in the news is that now we're putting names out there and we're impacting people's careers and reputation without understanding that this process is not clean, it's not scientific, and they are doing everything in their power to bring the unbiased, objective, unvarnished truth about what is going on. And this is across the intelligence community. So where there might be some debate or some discussion or some difference of views, that goes on every single day. When my analyst comes in and they brief me on a topic, I am questioning everything that they present to me. And that questioning could be viewed as I'm trying to get them to change the view. But the reality is it's a dialectic. We're debating issues that are not as clear as 1 + 1 =. So I want us to let this investigation play itself out. The analysts that are down there are professionals. The folks who lead those analysts are professionals. Let the investigation play itself out. And if we discover that someone has changed, for whatever reason, the assessment, we'll deal with that. We'll learn from it. We'll strengthen our analytic rigor, and the intelligence community will be better as a result of bringing this out in the IG. But I beg all of you who write these stories, think about what you're doing when you put names of people whose careers are at stake here, whose reputation, who've committed years and years of service to do the best for their nation, and we throw their names around as if having judged them before the investigation's complete.
So on that note,
So I'm
General,
okay. I wasn't going to say any of that. I was just going to say no comment, but it's starting to annoy me just a little bit.
we will keep this in context.
Yeah.
But just to ask, what about those people who sign on and sign on to the policies that are prescribed for their position that want to speak out about something later? I mean, what do you do about that? How do you engage that particular scenario where people go to the press, whistleblower?
Yeah, so I've been doing this business for about 34 years now. We think that we've got analytic standards that have improved significantly since 9/11. We have analytic ombudsmen where people can go to if they have issues where they feel they're getting some degree of pressure. We look at analytic integrity every year in terms of how well we're following the process and whether or not folks are being influenced, unusual influence. I think we're pretty comfortable. We have the things in place that will deal. We have the IG, and it's a wonderful thing that someone feels confident enough that there's a concern and they go to the IG to have them work this out. It's a great story. It's an incomplete story, and there's nothing to see here. Quit writing about it.
General Stewart, thank you. Dr. Hoffman, we probably need to go to you now because the other panelists up here clearly, obviously don't want to talk about this because, I mean, there are government connections there, obviously, and Ms. Hainsworth, you don't.
I absolutely have nothing to say
I
about
know.
the IG.
Because of that. So, Dr. Hoffman, what's your view on how this actually impacts security, impacts the effectiveness of the organization when you have, as General Stewart said, these kinds of conversations, these kinds of discussions, and this back and forth that goes on, and somehow it makes it out into the public domain. And in many cases, it's not viewed with the same kind of understanding that it is in the environment that the discussion took place. But it's out there. So what do you do with it now, and how is it managed? How should it be managed?
Well, I'm glad I'm me and not General Stewart, actually, in having to answer this. I mean, two things. I think, firstly, I've spent most of my career either in think tanks or in academia. I had 2 short periods of time when I actually worked at the CIA and spent a year also at the FBI. And I have to say, the intelligence community, from an outsider's observations, is really the institution where there is the unbridled search for the truth. Of that, there is no doubt. The kinds of discussions that are involved amongst analysts, the type of information that they're attempting to assess and to vet, is really designed to produce, I think, the most, on scholarly levels, the most acute and the sharpest analysis and the most accurate analysis that's derived from that. So from that, I think there's no doubt. I think, though, there's always going to be an inherent tension between the world as we wish it would be, and I think that, especially after a decade of waging the war on terrorism, there's a certain sense of fatigue. I think there is very much, understandably, a school of thought that the glass is half full, that we've made tremendous strides in the war on terrorism. Of that, there's absolutely no doubt. But I think there's always going to be people, given the complexity of the threat, given that studying and following terrorism is a black box to begin with, that the intelligence community has greater insight into it than virtually anybody else does, but even they don't have a complete picture. I mean, they're assembling a jigsaw puzzle, in essence, in the dark. There's always going to be this tension, and there's always going to be, I think, precisely disputes over how far progress has been achieved against a particular enemy that we don't have a complete window into, and how much more is yet to be done. Now, I've studied terrorism for 39 years, again, mostly from the outside, but I can tell you there's no political administration in the world, whether it's the United States or any other country, that wants bad news about a war or a struggle against terrorism. And therefore, there is a tendency, I think, naturally, to look at the successes and to perhaps emphasize those and put those forward. And the media also, I think, reports that. Going back to 2003 and the invasion of Iraq, there have been any number of times we've been told that al-Qaeda or this threat is on the verge of strategic collapse. We've been very close many times, but it hasn't materialized either. We now face, I think, a much more complex problem with more diverse adversaries than we've ever had in the past. So you can see this tension, I think, that surfaced in being reported about CENTCOM. It's a pity that it's gotten into the press and that it's involved the Inspector General, but it's also, I think, an enormous strength of the intelligence community that there can be these debates, and that we have analysts that are that dedicated, that are willing to sign on and put their name on the line, basically the careers on the line, to get them to make sure that their point of view is gotten across. So it's, yes, it's uncomfortable. It's messy, but I think how many other countries do we have these kinds of debates that are played out in the open? Do we have loyal, dedicated analysts that, as I said, are willing to put their careers on the line for what they believe in? So I know this is an enormous problem now, but it's testament to our strength.
Yeah. Mr. Mulligan, one of the things that Dr. Hoffman talked about specifically was the sources of media today, basically. Some of the sources where information comes from, and the development of those sources over the past few years has been exponential in terms of their reach and their availability to the general public. And terrorist groups appear, from your perspective at the National Counterterrorism Center, terrorist groups, just as much as regular folks here in the States and anywhere else in the world, have access to these tools, and they do just as much talking and just as much blabbing as anyone else does with these kinds of tools. Have you found them to be beneficial to you in your work? And are there other ways in which terrorists with social media, or terrorist organizations, nefarious organizations with social media, are assistive to the intelligence collection process?
Well, what I would say is that we live in an era in which there is a democratization of technology, which has resulted in a global increase in the availability of information, so that one of the challenges we had, and I think it came up during Director Clapper's talk, is the fact that within the intelligence community there is an orientation to be more transparent, but an awareness that in that transparency there is some degree of risk. We should not for a second discount the ability of a lot of these terrorist elements to be conducting some fairly high-level research, to be studying a lot of the security tradecraft of the U.S. and its partners, and to be trying to discover ways in which they could exploit those defense mechanisms. The challenge that we have in the intel community also is the fact that the means of communication, the means of discourse, the means of facilitating knowledge transfer have just exploded. And so it's become much more of a challenge for us. We're dealing with far greater degrees of data on a daily basis, and the community has to work through that data as efficiently as possible. So there has been, and some of the other folks around this group would attest, a real move to try and find technological solutions that will improve our capabilities in that regard. But it is very much, I would also say, a generational issue. We have a terrorist element, a demographic that is much more conversant and competent in technology, and we see the way that they employ modern technology and social media to advance their narrative, to reach out to potential candidates. And so it is just a very, very different environment than it was just even 10 years ago.
So Lenny and John, you two are involved in two different ends or polar ends of the intelligence collection picture, the government part, and then there's the private sector part, which obviously have to be firewalled to some degree, but you do provide part of this flow of information that we've heard from Mr. Mulligan regarding what's necessary in order to figure out what the adversaries are doing. So I'd like to hear from you, Lenny, about what it is that Northrop Grumman feels is its model of success for providing what it can in ISR for the government to help federal agencies get what they need and understand it, and how do you go about doing that?
Sure. Certainly the notion of getting at what is now, I'll call it a data explosion, getting at the just volume of data and being able to ingest that data and take that data in a way that can be used by our government customers in an effective way to be able to make decisions is something that we are taking on. It's something that as a community we have to work on. It's an area that we need to invest in from a technology development perspective, in terms of ways we do upstream and back-end fusion, the way we manage data all together, the way that we secure and cyber protect that information is something that as a community, not just the industry alone, but in partnership with our government customers, are working on to be able to give the decision advantage to the decision makers in our government customer community when they need it. So it's a critical part of where we're looking at in terms of our own focus, as well as working together with our government customers to focus on. There's another aspect of that I'll just share, and that is moving towards a more open and collaborative workspace to enable that data delivery to be most effective. And that means partnerships that maybe we didn't have in the past in our community, in our industry community, working together to bring best-of-breed capabilities across, I'll say, company lines as well as cross-company lines to make sure that we deliver the best solution possible in the fastest way.
Mr. Gulgazian, you have had a role, the NGA team has had a role that was yours for many years. But now you're sharing that with the private sector. And I'm just wondering, is that the right thing to do? Should it not be an all-government priority? And the reason I ask the question is because of concerns about security of information, not because the private sector doesn't get it done well. But the question is, why do you feel that the private sector can help you do something better now that you've done yourself for many years, and what's the reason for it?
Sure. I want to address that in two ways and kind of riff off of something that John said. John talked about what analysts are faced with today. and just this flood of information that they have to deal with. And I'll get to why the partnership with industry is growing and needs to grow and continue. It's because of the change in the amount of information we have. We've talked about that all day long, and making sense of that information. And the classic way that we've approached from my job, collection. In the past, it was we had 10 pounds of requirements and 5 pounds of capability, and from a collection standpoint, my folks' job was to allocate those 5 pounds toward the information that's needed by analysts, and we never had enough of it. That's flipped on its ear. The combination of what we have from classified sources, compounded with the explosion, I'll use your word, of information that we have from unclassified sources, has done 2 things to us. One, it's given analysts more to get through, made their job, as someone mentioned earlier, a needle in a stack of needles. So we have to rethink how we approach the collection of information. And instead of driving toward analysis, driving collection, we have to let the content focus the analytical reporting. And we talked earlier about using big data analytics to do that. And so so we can use big data to understand what and where, and have analysts understand the why and what's next. How do we partner with industry on that? I think it's freeing the analysts from some of the rote information that rote analysis they've had to do in the past. So are there certain activities that we can democratize, that we can use a little more freely in the open, or work with our industry partners to do? We talked earlier about O&I focusing on the number of gray hulls across the world, so that the Navy understands what the force production is of certain countries around the world. Well, I hope most people around the world understand that we do that and should do that, and that's a good thing. As there are some areas like that we can use automation to do, as imagery, unclassified imagery, commercial imagery becomes more and more ever-present. Image of the Earth every day from some companies, in certain latitudes, multiple images of the same area every day. Right. The algorithms that we can apply against that can count the ships, can count the tanks in the garrison, can count these things, and provide that as a service. There's 10 of these, there's 10 of these, there's 10 of these, there's 10 of these, there's 30 of these. Apply that, give that to an analyst, so all of a sudden there's 30 of something. It's 2 times as much as it normally is. Go look here. So I think there's certain areas that, as an example, areas that we know that there is certain standards to, that we can apply to industry to offload, that we'll be doing these anyways. So it's no longer a secret that we're looking at this area anymore, because the technology will be doing that anyways. Right. So let's apply that and use that to benefit our analysts, to allow them to focus on really what's important.
So basically what I'm hearing you say is that you need your people to be able to focus, and private sector can do some of this stuff better than the government can do it anyway. So why not?
Better, but not just better. They can do it now. Where in the past, those means and those methods and those sources were classified. Right. Now, and going into the future, they're becoming increasingly unclassified. Right. And those methodologies are being used for business purposes. Right. So let's take those methods that are in the unclassified world, that are being applied toward business investments, and apply them toward our industry.
Okay. General Stewart, we're going to ask the group one more question, and then we will be opening up for questions from the floor. But we didn't do this question first because I wanted to get into the news so that we could deal with that first. So now I just want to get into the real meat and potatoes of why we're here, and that is your views on the state of the world today. What are the challenges, the vulnerabilities, the threats that this nation faces as a result of the pace, the speed of change, technology, and geopolitics today? What are the main issues out there?
I tell a story often about when I started in 1981, how simple the world was. Soviet Union on one side, us on the other side. Pretty straightforward, kinetic options if we got into conflict with each other. That world has significantly changed. The Middle East is far more complicated than at any time in my career. Asia Pacific, Indo-Pacific has a number of flashpoints that should be concerning to all of us. Changes in Europe, migration patterns. I have not seen in my 34 years a more complicated, more complex, more dynamic environment than we live in today. And it goes back to how we think about sifting through all of this data, teeing up this data for our decision makers, because we now have almost any citizen of the world can make news, can create information, can create intelligence, quite frankly. If you're equipped with a smartphone and you're in the right place at the right time, and you're signed on to Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook. So not only is the world more complex, but it's now collapsing in space and time because of the way that information is moving across the global information grid. And so it is much more complex, it's much more dynamic, it must be much more precise, and it's got to be incredibly timely. So we need great analysts who can think, we need great folks who can sift through the data, and we need great visualization to render that data into context that helps our decision makers make timely decisions.
If you had a wish list of things, elements, issues, or even people and tools that could help you get a leg up on everything you face today, what would be on that list?
I need great people who can think first. It's always about people. Good people who can be critical thinkers, good people who can communicate, folks who are willing to do the grunge work and sifting through those reams and reams of data. Then I need tools that will help me to get us after through all of that data. And then I've got to have a great visualization concept. The idea that I'm going to be able to publish a Intel estimate, and I'm going to publish it, and I'm going to get it through the editors, and I'm going to get it bound, and I'm going to deliver it to a consumer who's going to read this 150-page document while the world is changing. I think those days are gone. So we've got to figure out a way that we're going to deliver content in a richer, interactive, immersive environment, and I think industry can certainly help us in that space a great deal.
Mr. Mulligan, did you want to weigh in on that?
I strongly agree with General Stewart's observations. I would also offer to those of the younger members of the audience who might be contemplating a career in intelligence, specifically counterterrorism, I would urge you, examine yourselves and see if you are optimistic people. Because I say that because I find that it's very easy at times to look at a world of great complexity and at times be overwhelmed by it, but while failing to look at what really drives the Intel community to success, and that is creativity, ingenuity, and implementation. And I got to say that that's the one thing that keeps it very fresh for me in my career. I've seen people come up with solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems. And I think that some of the positive aspects is that, going back to some of the observations the other folks have made, we understand a lot more about human performance than we did years ago, and we try and apply those concepts to the Intel community. We understand a lot more about working together, about coalitions, about cooperation, about networked work environments. So I tend to see things right now, despite the fact we're facing these enormous challenges, through the optic that we really are getting better and we are improving in our understanding of how we can fight the threats against our nation.
If I can pile on too, boy,
Yes, sir.
the creative thinkers, the ones who can walk out of the linear thinking and go find me the black swan, where we can see things building, but I really need someone to go, what about this possibility? The out-of-the-box ideas. Okay. I got to find the black swans. The linear stuff we'll find. We'll have enough collection. We'll have enough, maybe enough time. It's not the right. But it's those weird anomalies that none of us are thinking creatively enough to spot early enough.
Anyone else? Because we've got some very interesting questions from the audience, but if you're burning to answer that one, please feel free.
For me, I would say the talent equation is a big challenge for all of us. And being able to get at the right talent, have the right folks engaged, really have a workforce that extends beyond the workforce that we currently employ. That means you, for those of you who never got offered to consider going to industry, please consider that today as well. Your jobs in the future are very critical to the success of all of the missions that we serve. So for us, the talent equation is critical.
I'll take 30 seconds.
Sure,
Get
go
the
ahead.
questions. We've
50.
talked okay, thank you. We've talked a lot today about advancements in technology and how that is changing and can change our business even more. Well, technology will get us so far, because if we wrap old business processes around new technology, we still have old processes. So, we've built, we've built some fabulous abilities in the intelligence community over the past few years to really collaborate more. One of I think the main challenges we face will be to take full advantage and reinvent our business process to be able to collaborate and develop the products that I think General Stewart is talking about, where it is a living, breathing product. And a couple of years ago, when I ran an old organization, I challenged my folks to think of how we would get our information out if NGA did not have a website. If there was just a way for the community to access all data, and how would that look and how would that feel? And I think that's what we all need to move toward to really do this as well. The technology is great, but if we wrap the old process around it, it's just a faster horse and buggy.
Awesome. So here's a really interesting question that I know all of you want to answer. With the recent leaks and transparency issues, how will that affect our ability to leverage bilateral collection or partnerships in denied areas without U.S. presence or U.S. capabilities? Dr. Hoffman, let's start with you on that.
Probably the least qualified to answer that question.
Well, you probably can speak more freely, no?
Can I speak more intelligently, more knowledgeably? That's the question. I mean, obviously, going back to the WikiLeaks in recent years and then Snowden on top of that, this has created a huge problem. I mean, the transparency cuts both ways. We've been discussing most of today the good side of transparency. But there's another side of transparency where enemies get to know all our secrets and where some of our closest relationships are either compromised or there's a danger of them being compromised because of information that comes out of the United States. And, obviously, the control of information is much more difficult than in the past, but I think especially in counterterrorism, the imperative of working even more closely with our local allies, bilaterally and multilaterally, is more important than ever. So this has to be one of the highest priorities.
Mr. Mulligan, you're looking at me, and I know you really...
Yes, I'm interested in what your next question is going to be.
Okay. Well, just remember you asked, because here it is. In what ways do you see the intelligence community competing with or cooperating with the press and social media?
Was that your question, JJ?
No, it's right here. Trust me. And to finish the question, and I'll just read it again for clarity. In what ways do you see the IC competing with or cooperating with the press and social media for informing policy and decision makers?
I think that there's been a bit of frustration over the last few years within the intel community because we felt, many of us, and some of you know my background would understand it, felt that it was very difficult to get the other side of the story out with regard to a lot of the disclosures. I think that we have come into an understanding that we need to be in a place where people have confidence in their government, confidence that the activities that we are undertaking on behalf of them are consistent with the law, consistent with national policy, and again, that we are as transparent as we can be without damaging intelligence tradecraft. So I think that there is much more of an orientation right now to talk about the challenges that we're facing, and again, to talk about that, again, it's easy for me, not easy, counterterrorism isn't easy, but working in counterterrorism, when you talked about the challenges with our partners, we don't really have our partners have the same kind of concerns about terrorism, and so they're oriented to work with us. Industry, obviously, is very motivated to try and help us with this difficult problem, and mothers, fathers, families, when they see their children who at times are very idealistic and are motivated by, this disembodied message that comes through their children through the internet, and then suddenly they find that they've gone off to join ISIL or some other entity. They're motivated to work with us. So I think that we are entering into an era in which there is a broader understanding that it is a truly whole of government effort on counterterrorism, and that for us in the intel community, to the extent that we can help foster understanding of that, that's where we're
So as a prescriptive measure, is it helpful then to, if you run into this scenario, which I'm sure it's never happened, where the press doesn't tell the story you want told, so is it helpful to create your counter-narrative and then go out with it using your own means?
Well, let me just say, we never developed proficiencies in dealing with the press. I mean, part of the issue was the public affairs organizations within the respective intelligence community were really disproportionately small. It was, one team, one fight, one deep. Now, increasingly, we're understanding that the questions that we are fielding and the need to be responsive to that requires a broader amount of resources within our agencies.
General Stewart, you don't want to make news, but I know you want to answer this one.
I read, maybe it was this morning or yesterday morning, an article. I don't know if it was an article. It was online on a journal. That the headline said, heads roll at DIA. And the story was that my directorate of analysis stepped down from her position because of the controversy in CENTCOM, and went on and told this fairy tale about what had occurred. So I'm going to use this opportunity to set the record straight. Kathy Johnson, who was named in this article, is one of the most incredible analysts we have in our community. But if folks didn't know any different, they would have read that article, and they'd assume, because that article said, I forget the line, exclusive source says that Kathy steps down. Nothing could have been further from the truth. So where we're competing is, how do we get the truth out before people make decisions and policymakers make policy with incomplete information? If you read that story, you would have thought Kathy Johnson basically was fired. I moved Kathy Johnson to take on one of the most challenging jobs that I have in the agency, the job that I just described about how we visualize content for the future. If you read that article, heads rolled at DIA. Now, that's the negative competition side. I've now got to clean that up. That was horrible journalism. Horrible. Their sources were bad. The conclusions they drew were bad. They tarnished the great reputation of one of our great analysts, great Americans. The other side of this, though, is industry and the media are using some of the data science tool and using data science techniques that are producing some of the most exquisite analysis. I know a couple different companies, I won't name them here, who produce things about threats in cyberspace that was as good as anything the intelligence community produced. Because the data is out there, it's publicly available, it's accessible, and if you put the right tools and the right people against it, you can do some pretty good work. So I tell my workforce, we're in competition. We're in competition not only for how we capture open source information and use that as part of the analytic process with the things that we steal, the secrets that we gather from our collection means, so that we can put that information in context and get it there faster, more complete, more accurate, so our decision makers are well prepared. But the other side, though, really poor journalism, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I had the opportunity to fix that. Kathy Johnson is a great American. Make news about that.
Lindy Haynesworth, and thank you, General, for putting that into perspective there, because that's a part of what we wanted to do today was understanding, insight, and obviously truth is important. Has the IC tried self-reflexivity as an alternative to objectivity in your mind?
That's an interesting question.
Yes, and this is a group of very interesting people, and this came from one of them. So
I don't even know what the hell that means.
I'm
I don't even know how to answer that question.
going to put this into perspective for you.
All right.
I'm
Sorry.
thinking, has the intelligence community tried to look internally? Thank you. As an alternative to,
No one else was going to say they didn't know what it means, so I thought I would have
to objectivity. So there's something here in quotes. I mean, in parentheses. The bottom line of what I think this question is getting at
Okay.
is there room for the intelligence community and its partners to realize that it can be wrong? And what do you do about that? Let's try Ms. Hainsworth first,
Sure. And I think,
especially when it comes to collecting and analysis.
well, let's see. In terms of collection and analysis, you know, the industry role is one, solving problems that are laid out before us. So that reflection, that correction sometimes comes in the opportunity for us to influence how those problems can be solved. And I have not come across an industry partner engaged with a customer partner where the customer wasn't open to how could we solve problems more effectively, how could we work towards solutions either more quickly or more accurately. So in relationship between industry and our government customer partners, I'd say yes, because we've realized that self-correction over time.
Okay. General.
We have right now an incident that we're looking at that no one has said we missed on, but I'm saying we missed. And I'm having my analytic team go back and do a postmortem looking at what we thought we knew and working our way backwards to see if we could have seen this event unfold better, faster, and reported it in a more compelling manner. So we do this as a matter of routine. So anytime someone says that there's an intel failure, and even if they don't say it's a failure, we're going to go back and do that postmortem and see if we can do this business more accurately, faster, tell a more compelling story. Again, this is about buying time for our decision makers. And if I give our decision makers 72 hours of warning, that's not enough warning in today's day. I've got to give them a lot more time.
Just briefly, does that process color the way in which your analysts or your team members think or engage after that postmortem, which essentially is questioning what happened or how it went? Does that?
I hope it colors it, quite frankly. I hope it makes them think, because again, it goes back to, in this case, we were looking at very linear approach, and we missed the black swan. So I want them to go back and go, was there a collection that we missed? Was there a point at the analytic debate where someone killed an idea or killed a discussion that would have helped us? So I'm driving them. And this is not new to DIA. This is about what the community does. We are self-correcting, we're self-reflecting, we hope we're learning, and we hope we're doing this better every single time because we know how important this is, and we can't miss.
Mr. Mulligan, another question. Please characterize the relationship between your analysts and collectors and what can be improved.
Well, that's a very interesting question. My organization is not a collection organization. We depend on the kindness of strangers. No, just kidding. We take data that is collected from other organizations, from other agencies, and we have the ability to fuse that data. One of the things I think we add value in is that a lot of times we'll go back, we'll work the data that has been collected, return it back to those collection agencies as potential lead information, which again, they find beneficial. The issue for us is we have to be particularly mindful of the tradecraft and operational equities of those organizations whose data we use, because, I mean, again, we are not collectors, we are the analyzers of that information.
Okay. Dr. Hoffman, what is the next, okay. What is the next disruptive technology likely to change our collection, analysis, or dissemination capabilities? What's your crystal ball say about what's out there? You've seen a number of things radically change the way in which collection has taken place. Obviously, technology and social media, a number of other tools that have come out of that. What do you say?
Well, I finally got an easy question. I think, and I'm not even actually, I'm serious about that. For me, I think the answer is clear. It's terrorist use of some, I'm hesitant to say weapon of mass destruction, but certainly some unconventional weapon. What worries me the most is that not only have the number of terrorist groups proliferated in a far more diffuse geographical landscape. 10 years ago, we were focused on Al-Qaeda, basically in two places, Iraq and in South Asia. Now we have far more groups than Al-Qaeda, including Al-Qaeda itself, but ISIS as well. But what worries me the most is that, 30 years ago, Prime Minister Thatcher said that publicity is the oxygen that terrorists depend on. In the 21st century, it's access to sanctuary and safe haven. And that, I think, has been the single most alarming development over the past 3 or 4 years, is the proliferation of sanctuaries and safe havens in failed or failing states and lawless border areas. And we just have to look back a decade and a half in history when Al-Qaeda had possession of a sanctuary and safe haven that was essentially unmolested. What were they doing? They weren't only plotting attacks on our embassies in East Africa and plotting the 9/11 attack. They were also pursuing, on often multiple tracks, chemical, biological, and even a nuclear weapons program. Now, fortunately, the nuclear weapons program wasn't even in the quarter or eighth-baked realm, but it was serious. But they had parallel, multiple tracks, compartmentalized efforts to weaponize anthrax. They're only a few years away from. Chemical weapons as well. Well, we've already seen ISIS use chemical weapons now on at least a half dozen occasions that have been documented in the past year. We know that these groups have access to sanctuary and safe haven. We also know that the demographic pattern of terrorist recruitment is changing. When I first started studying terrorism in the 1970s and 80s, most terrorists were either teachers or doctors. Today, many terrorists, and many of the worst terrorists, of course, are engineers and scientists, and that's going to change the nature of terrorism. So the challenge for the intelligence community, and this is bearing in mind what the DNI said just a few minutes ago. He said that recruitment is flat or slightly declining. What I've just described are proliferating groups, far more diverse geographical area, operating out of more safe havens and sanctuaries than before. And we have to have a window into all of them precisely for this reason, because an unconventional attack, I think, will be a game changer, much as 9/11 was.
And that's something I want to take off on for a second here, the safe havens you talk about. What you do, John Gulgazian, assist in, getting some more eyes on or some tools into those places to get a view of what's happening in those safe havens. Does the proliferation of these organizations and the safe havens that used to be fairly finite, how does that impact your ability to gather?
No, good, tough question.
Good question.
And we're applying, and it takes a change in how we look at things. Especially for my organization, there's but so much we can tell from overhead imagery on what's going on the ground, what we can see. So we also have to look for sources of information that we can drive what can't be seen, and especially from the recruitment in the safe haven area. And we've invested heavily in things like human geography. What is the, what is the sentiment on the ground? What are those type of things? And not only from the physical human geography of where are the demographics of these areas, but taking advantage of the spatial and social aspects of sentiment in internet, social media and things like that, so that you can see the change over time in some of these areas. We're just moving into these areas, but it's a way that we can at least look at where the safe havens could be, or growing into some of these areas as well.
Lenny Hainsworth, as we are approaching the end of our panel here, I want to ask your view on, when you look at the complexity of collecting from these places, and ISR is developing just as much as any other technology is. Mm-hmm. Give us a sense of what you feel the real advantage of the persistence of surveillance evolution is giving the intelligence community now.
Okay. So persistence is something that we've enjoyed. over many years, and it's exploded with technology as technology has grown over the years. Certainly, we'll use an example of UAVs being able to give us what we call dwell persistence, and that advantage for us. But we also have to have, and it's tied back to John's prior comment, move towards more persistence around data and the heterogeneous data persistence, and being able to take advantage of that as we ingest mounds of data from many, many sources to get at many of these dynamic problems. And then also leverage that data to do things with it in an automated, fast way. And so we talked a little bit earlier about stovepipes across capabilities. Those stovepipes across capabilities across our IC community have to be broken. And I mean broken in a way that we can leverage these capabilities cross INTs, cross systems, cross domains, so that we can get at those problems in a more crisp and fast way. For us at Northrop, C4ISR is really part of that. It's really about creating an advantage, an overwhelming advantage for our nation's decision makers. And that's what we do. We stitch our capabilities together across our company and look at ways that we can identify the environment, understand adversaries, understand their intent, and get that data fast to our decision makers.
Can I riff off of something that she said at the end? Yeah. Persistence is not only about putting some type of ISR asset over top of an area and staring at it forever. It's really about understanding what is happening from that area down to the ground. And think about areas of stress or areas of potential influence by some of these forces. And things like, what is the price of bread at the local bakery inside of some of these areas that we're worried about? As that goes up, those areas get under stress, and then issues happen on the ground, the demographics. So persistence can be a mobile application that tracks the price of consumer goods in an area to see what areas are under stress that could be more vulnerable to radicalization or to other issues. So persistence we have to think of it differently than traditionally I think we've thought of it in the past.
Absolutely.
This panel has been called the Future for Intelligence Analysis Collection and Activities. And our panelists, General Vince Stewart, Mr. John Gulgazian, Lenny Hainsworth, Bruce Hoffman, and John Mulligan. We thank you all for your time, your insight, and most of all, your candid responses to some difficult questions, but some fun questions too. But we thank you for the input and the insight today. Thank you.